Welcome to a Stepping Stones to Awareness show. I'm Caroline Stevens, and today I've got Anthony Stansfeld in the studios. Now, Anthony is the Thames Valley Police Crime Commissioner, and we've got a shared interest in financial matters, having both been involved with banks and insurance companies, but from different parts of the spectrum. So welcome, Anthony, and thank you so much for coming into the studios. So would you like to talk to us about the ITNJ, your role in Thames Valley, and how you got involved in the financial side of things, please?
Well, Thames Valley prosecuted a huge fraud over a period of about 3 years, and the verdicts came out last February, and it was against a number of HBOS bankers and their accomplices, basically, and it was a massive fraud.
And this was a case where HBOS hit the headlines. Was it about 2008?
Yes, but I mean, the case didn't start till several years after that.
And who brought this? And it was yourself and your team?
It was Thames Valley Police brought
Right.
it. I mean, I don't prosecute or anything. You know, it is the police that do that. But it was a case that I very much supported. And it took 3 years. It cost Thames Valley Police £7 million to bring the case, and enormously expensive. It took up a huge number of officers and legal time, but it resulted in sentences, the heaviest sentences for fraud for a very long time. I think 6 people went down for cumulatively 48 years in prison. And of course, a huge number of companies and individuals were absolutely destroyed by the frauds.
And it's too late for them to resurrect their businesses, I presume.
Yes, most of them. And it took, of course, it happened a long time before the verdicts in the case. And what I found extraordinary was the bank, Lloyds, who'd taken over HBOS, denied absolutely until after the verdicts came in that there had been a fraud at all. And they knew perfectly well there was a fraud. Because
presumably the people at the top were involved, implicated. You know, they carry the can at the end of the day, don't they?
Yes, I mean, there was a cover-up, I have no doubt about that.
And do you feel this sort of thing still happens today?
Yes, I think it was the tip of an iceberg. This was one branch of one bank. I think it's gone on very wide scale in 2 banks in particular. I think it was going on in Lloyds itself, besides HBOS, and Lloyds, of course, took over HBOS, and I think it was going on in the Royal Bank of Scotland.
And I noticed in the letter that you showed me this morning that it is very difficult for police resources to spend that much time on these matters because, you know, they haven't got the facilities, they haven't got the resources. So the funding means that you haven't got the specialised people that you need to be able to bring these people to account.
And that is absolutely the case. The police don't have the capacity or the capability. I mean, Thames Valley is one of the biggest police forces in the country, and it's stretched us absolutely completely. But for most police forces, which are half the size or a third of our size, they simply don't have the money to take on a big case, especially if a bank is involved.
Well, it's interesting hearing your situation in Thames Valley. I used to be the education spokesman for an actuarial consumer working committee, and I was the only non-actuary on that team. And you know, we looked at the small print that was being produced by the banks, for example, when they asked customers to sign contracts with them. And we've got financial education into schools now, and I was part of that campaign with Martin Lewis. But, you know, you can do all the education you want in these schools, but when the small print keeps getting smaller and smaller and more complicated, then it's not going to help matters, is it, the education in schools, because the banks are one step ahead.
Yes, I mean, the banks rely on it being very complicated.
And very small.
But I'm delighted there were some actuaries on the actuarial board. It was what's fascinating in the banks. There are usually no bankers on their boards at all. There are no qualified bankers on the boards of most banks. And in Lloyds, I think they have 11 members on the board. There is only one non-executive who's a banker.
Of course, the big case that hit the headlines a few years ago was the Cooperative Bank, and you had an ex-Methodist minister in charge. But I don't think he'd only been a bank clerk for a very short space of time, hadn't he, in his formative years?
Yes, the trouble is if you have no bankers on the boards of your banks, they have no idea how to behave, and this is what has been happening.
So how did you get involved in the International Tribunal? Because there's been a lot of circulation on social media of some of those.
I was asked. I think it's as simple as that. And
you talked about your experiences in Thames Valley.
And I talked about the bigger picture as well as what happened, because of course it's not a Thames Valley issue, it's a nationwide issue, this. And there are, several thousand companies were basically bankrupted through the banking system after 2008, and none of this really should have happened.
So are you busy networking with other police crime commissioners and sharing your experiences with them? Will it help them?
I think so, but the problem is that they all look at Thames Valley and say it cost you £7 million to take on this one case. And in fact, we got £2 million back from the Home Office. But that is still one huge chunk out of your budget. So for small police forces to take on a fraud, probably less than 1% of fraud is investigated in this country. I think in Thames Valley we probably lose less than £10 million through household burglary every year. In fraud, I don't know what it's running at, but I'd be very surprised if it's running at less than £2,000 million in Thames Valley. We're a big economic area. The fraud nationally, Portsmouth University did a study on it and said it was running at about 193 billion a year. And that is 3 years ago. I heard the Home Secretary, I think it was in 2015, give a speech in London where she said it was running at about 60 billion. The trouble is, nobody knows what it's running at. It's some very, very large sum of money, and probably between 100 and 250 billion a year. And it's a massive drain on the national economy.
So what's the Financial Conduct Authority doing about all of this?
Well, I think they're very stretched for a start. I don't think they have enough people to deal with these problems. I think, the will is probably there, but the means is not there to actually do anything about it. And it's not just the Financial Conduct Authority, it's also the Bank of England should be taking an interest in the behaviour of the banks, and I don't think they have done so.
The Bank of England is a private corporation, isn't it?
I think technically it's not very private.
It acts like a corporation, that's
Yes.
for sure. How do you think we can improve the situation in this country?
I think there are a number of measures. I made a speech the other day and I outlined about 8 of them. I'm not going to remember them off the top of my head. But the first thing is you've got to have what's called a Chapter 11 system, which makes it impossible for a bank to bankrupt companies with very little notice, if any. You've got to have a system that gives companies a time in which to pay off their loans or sort it out. In America they have it, Germany, France, all countries do. We're the only country that doesn't. And in this country a bank can call in the loan and overnight practically bankrupt a company. That is quite wrong. We've also got to actually spend some money on dealing with fraud. I think the City of London, who lead on a lot of it through action fraud, get about 15 million a year. Serious Fraud Office, I think, gets 35 million, 40. We're looking at about 50, 60 million pounds to take on a problem of several, probably 2,000 million pounds, 200,000 million pounds, or 200 billion. And this simply doesn't even scratch the surface of it. I think it's quite easy to do. Financial Conduct Authority has averaged about £1 billion in fines over the last few years. They should put at least 500 million into fighting fraud, and about 300 million should go to police forces at a regional level to set up proper fraud units with skilled accountants. They don't need many police officers, they're just feel the collars when they arrest people, but it needs forensic accountants to do this. We also need to put more money into the Serious Fraud Office and also into the National Crime Agency to deal with fraud. And if it was financed properly, and the moment we actually arrested a few of the very senior people involved in this, I'm sure the amount of fraud would drop dramatically and very quickly.
Well, talking about senior people, we were talking off air earlier, and we were talking about the problems in our Parliament, that it's become quite apparent that they're not listening to the people, and we want to know why. And there's a lot more growing resentment in the population, and they want to hold the MPs to account. So we've got MPs that we know have got shell companies out of addresses such as Finchley Road. And for those people listening at home, shell companies are effectively a hard shell, a company registration, but pretty much empty inside. And it's a way of collecting money and disposing of it accordingly. So we need MPs also to be held to account for, you know, their involvement in the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, tax schemes are linked with Belize, for example. And this, you know, this is businessmen, politicians, current serving MPs. If we do not hold our MPs to account, we don't stand much of a chance in holding these banks to account either, do we?
Yes. I would only partially agree with that. I mean, the all-party parliamentary banking group, led by Deputy Chairman is a man called Kevin Hollinrake, are doing a fantastic job trying to bring this to account. And there's a debate about it tomorrow in Parliament. There have been 3 debates. The problem, I don't think, is the MPs. I'm sure there are some dodgy MPs around. But the problem,
Just a few.
The problem far more is, I think, lies within the civil service and with the establishment in the Treasury and the Cabinet Office that is very reluctant to bring these things home to roost, because I think, and understandably, they tried to protect the banks, but they did so to the detriment of a huge number of people and a huge number of businesses when they were trying to recover the money. And this came out of, I think, starting with Gordon Brown as Prime Minister, when HBOS was put into Lloyd's and RBS was rescued. And the sums of money involved were absolutely huge, but the damage done to companies was massive. And I don't think that was probably understood at the time. But I think the all-party parliamentary banking group is doing a remarkable job trying to bring this to account.
Gordon Brown, the man who sold a lot of our gold off at rock bottom prices, which has had a huge impact on pension returns, I'll be honest. So, as we say, we're talking about MPs. When you go to your all-party parliamentary group meeting tomorrow, it would be really, really good for the general public to advise them of these politicians. We've got the information here. So if you can highlight the fact that some of these politicians do have shell companies in Finchley Road and other such addresses, then that would maybe 2019 would be a happy new year for the general public.
I mean, I don't speak at the debate. I'm not a member of Parliament. You know, I may.
But you could be our go-between.
I may be elected over a very large area, but I'm not a member of Parliament, so I don't speak. But I have no doubt at all that a lot of MPs will go to it. And I think they're entirely sympathetic, the MPs that go to it. And as I said, I think the problem is far more lies within the establishment, funnily enough, than within Parliament itself.
Well, sometimes the parliamentarians are part of the establishment as well.
That is
what
true.
we can do is we can give you some of our videos. We've actually interviewed an expert on shell companies out of Finchley Road, and I've interviewed him 5 times. So perhaps you could share some of those videos with the MPs, and we now need a call for them to investigate perhaps some of their fellow peers. So, Anthony, would you like to leave a message for the public, the people at home watching the show today? What would you like to say to them?
I think I'd like to say that fraud is on a far larger scale than people realise. It's hugely damaging to the economy. I mean, we're supposed to be bailing out the European Union with 39 billion. But if we're losing 3 or 4 times that in fraud every year, there is something going badly wrong. And of course, it slows down our economy generally, and it ruins a lot of people. LIBOR and PPI skimmed money off the top, but it didn't ruin people. This particular way of doing business by the banks has ruined a huge number of people and destroyed a huge number of businesses, and that is unacceptable.
Absolutely, yes, for sure. Anything else?
No, that'll do.
Well, thank you so much, Anthony, for coming into the studios.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll interview you again soon.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll get some feedback as to what the MPs say about Finchley Road and their involvement in the Panama and Paradise Papers.
I have to say, I know very little about that.
I'll give you some information.
Okay.
Thank you, and all the
you very
best, and
much.
have a great Christmas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
And thank you to
Right.
everybody at home for watching the show. And I'm hoping that I'm going to have Anthony back in the hot seat next year, and he's going to give us feedback from the MPs. Have a great Christmas, everybody. I'm sure it's going to be a happy new year for us. Thank you and goodbye.
Mm.